Good afternoon from the KELOLAND Live Doppler Storm Center. Another warm afternoon. Temperatures well above average. You see our numbers already approaching 90 across western South Dakota. Forecast for today, middle 90s in western and central KELOLAND with a strong southerly wind in central and northern South Dakota. 80s will be found in eastern South Dakota. I'll have more details on your forecast coming up as we begin midday in KELOLAND.
Live from KELOLAND Media Group. Midday in KELOLAND.
A South Dakota judge dismisses a lawsuit involving the Hideaway Holes Sink Hills. Plus,
Congress has avoided a government shutdown by passing a short-term spending bill, but it sets up a holiday funding fight. I'm Hannah Brandt in Washington. I'll have that story coming up.
good afternoon and thanks for having us in. New this midday, a Sioux Falls man who has been wanted for over a month is now behind bars in the Minnehaha County Jail. According to online jail records, 47-year-old Orangey Johnson was arrested yesterday morning. He's accused of rape, sexual contact with a child, and child abuse. Court documents say the alleged victim was 12 years old when the crimes happened. We'll take a closer look at this case and hear from Sioux Falls police later today on KELOLAND News. A judge has thrown out a lawsuit brought by dozens of Black Hawk residents whose homes were built above an old gypsum mine that was exposed by a sinkhole back in 2020. A circuit court judge granted the state's motion for summary judgment and dismissed all the claims, ruling that the state has sovereign immunity, a sort of legal protection against lawsuits. The attorney for the homeowners said her clients will appeal to the state Supreme Court. KELOLAND's Tyler Louder will have a full report for us coming up later tonight. Pivoting to weather, it's dry out there, and Scott, doesn't sound like we're going to be getting much of any rain anytime soon.
No relief in sight, really, for the rain. We are looking at dry skies over the next week. The 7-day forecast is dry. And even going beyond, I wouldn't be surprised if the dry conditions do continue. Drought monitor came out this morning. It continues with the severe to extreme drought into western South Dakota, as we've had very dry conditions, of course, here. And this is an area that today has high fire danger, as well as parts of central South Dakota. This moderate category in southeastern KELOLAND is now connected from northeastern Nebraska into southwestern Minnesota. Cannot forget about north central and northeastern South Dakota, starting to see some moderate conditions just to the west of Mobridge. And here's our rainfall outlook for the next week and a half. Non-existent across much of the central northern plains over toward the western coast of the United States for the next week. High pressure will be anchored to our southwest. The hurricane that's coming on shore Florida momentarily, as well as a couple other areas of low pressure to our east, are cut off from the main stirring currents from the jet stream. So they'll stay in those areas for the next several days. It really bottles things up and causes things to move rather slowly across the United States. And that's the reason why we'll stay warm and dry for the next several days. Temperatures already in the 70s, 80s, to near 90 degrees in western South Dakota. And we have that southerly wind around 15 to 25 miles per hour. Wind gusts into that 30 mile per hour range in central and north central South Dakota. So there's that red flag warning for today in central and western KELOLAND, as we are looking at very low humidity and a warm afternoon and windy. Temperatures today in the middle 80s for Sioux Falls, eventually falling to the 50s later this evening into tonight. And for northeastern South Dakota, we'll have temperatures in the middle 80s today, falling to the 50s for overnight lows. This all happens with clear skies. In central South Dakota, temperatures in the 90s this afternoon, and western KELOLAND also getting in with temperatures into the 90s, a high of 95 in Rapid City, falling to the 50s later tonight toward tomorrow morning. So we'll go with widespread 80s across eastern KELOLAND, 90s in central and western South Dakota. And the forecast for this weekend, plenty of sunshine, plenty of heat too. We'll have temperatures in the 80s and 90s. I'll have more details on your KELOLAND Live Doppler forecast coming up.
Thank you, Scott. The federal government is no longer facing a shutdown. That's because last night Congress passed a short-term funding bill, but it's only a temporary fix. Washington, D.C. correspondent Hannah Brandt explains.
This funding bill keeps money flowing to federal agencies through the election, but it ends December 20th, setting up a holiday funding fight.
The American people can sleep easier, knowing we have avoided an unnecessary government shutdown.
Congress is celebrating after both the House and Senate passed a short-term funding bill known as a continuing resolution.
While continuing resolutions are never ideal, none of us like them. It's not a way to run a railroad. It allows Congress to continue serving the American people through the election.
House Republicans initially wanted to attach the SAVE Act to the funding bill, a measure that would require proof of citizenship to vote. But they were forced to take it out in order to reach a compromise that could pass.
It took much longer than it should have, but because House Republicans finally chose to work with us in the end, Congress is getting the job done.
The bill keeps most federal funding at its current levels and adds more money for the Secret Service and the upcoming presidential transition.
Nobody got everything they wanted, but we all thought, again, more money for the Secret Service, making sure there's enough money for transition, but let's leave everything else pretty much alone.
Not everyone is happy.
What are we doing? I mean, it's absurd. We irresponsibly continue to spend money that we do not have.
But the fight over what to cut and where to spend will continue as lawmakers now have more time to figure out a long-term budget.
Now we can get going in earnest on hammering out bipartisan full-year funding bills, including providing long overdue disaster assistance.
Now lawmakers are rushing back to their districts to hit the campaign trail with Election Day less than 6 weeks away. In Washington, I'm Hannah Brandt.
The richest rodeo in South Dakota history has made its return to Sioux Falls. The Cinch Playoffs is a 3-day event featuring everything from bull riding and steer wrestling to barrel racing and breakaway roping. Contestants are vying for a share of $1.3 million and the Governor's Cup.
Honestly, coming into this rodeo last year, nobody knew what to expect, and they sold this sucker out every single night, so getting to come back here is awesome. We got some family here and told them how exciting this rodeo is, and just the people, it's almost like the Thomas and Mack in here. They love rodeo, so it's awesome to get to come here.
The Thomas and Mack Center in Las Vegas hosts the National Finals Rodeo every December. The Cinch Playoffs kick off tonight at 7:30 at the Premier Center, and they continue Friday and Saturday nights. A man from Yankton has the need for speed ever since he was in his early 20s. Now at the age of 80 years old, he's still gearing up on the weekends and burning rubber on the racetrack and has no plans on stopping. His daughter says one thing she's learned by watching him over the years is drag racing is harder than it looks.
But you have to take off from the line where quickly. But not so quickly, like you want to have a really good reaction time, but not so quickly that you red light. So, I mean, you can lose the race at the line, and people might not realize that.
Coming up in tonight's Eye on KELOLAND, we're going to meet the man behind the wheel and share what keeps him going through the years.